Hello, good morning, Andy Brockman. It's a pleasure as always to have you here at Archaeo Soup Towers. And this morning, actually, I'm really eager to have a chat about the rumblings which have been building over the weekend, linked with this National Geographic story, specifically the so-called Nazi War Diggers TV series. Now, one of the reasons why I'm eager to talk with you about this actually is because I'm aware that you did have some association with this TV series. You, at the very least, you were approached for some advice early on. Could you possibly just briefly explain that?
Yeah, sure, Mark. I mean, what happened was about a year ago, I was contacted by a producer at Clear Story Productions who have made this series. And basically they said they are a company which specialise in high-end historical documentaries, which is true, and that they were currently in the early stages, I'm quoting here, of setting up a documentary about the exhumation of bodies and artefacts from World War II on the Eastern Front in the Baltic states, and looking at the overlap between official archaeology and unofficial, and the trade in memorabilia and so on, and that's end quote. So that's how it was pitched to me, and as a result, I met the producer and one of the co-executive producers for lunch at a very nice tapas bar in King's Cross, and we had a long conversation, discussed all the legal, ethical, moral and technical archaeological issues that they would need to address, and it ended up with me providing them with the contact details of a number of colleagues in the conflict archaeology world who could undertake support to their series in terms of forensic archaeology, explosive ordnance safety, the legal side and liaison with the legal authorities in third-party governments that might be involved in the sites they were filming in the Baltics and in Poland. So they were given a toolkit to do the series with legitimate archaeologists, 100% involved and supportive.
Now, that description actually sounds quite laudable. Examining some of these issues is something which National Geographic of old, certainly the respected journal, would probably be praised for doing. But as it stands, many archaeologists, myself, you, thousands of people around the world included, as it stands, we've been very concerned about what we've seen promoting this upcoming TV series, and as it stands, it is still upcoming. But I suppose the question is, what evidence is there which has actually got us concerned? Why are we concerned about a TV show that actually hasn't yet come out?
Well, I think we need to start by saying that the reason we're concerned is thanks to the terrific work that's been done on the archaeological social media and led by people like Paul Barford and Sam Hardy and hundreds of other people who spotted this advertising campaign for the series, which was due to air in April, which began late last week, and flagged up the issues. The issues are that the way the series was being promoted, it was being promoted with a website which had as its key visual material photographs which showed the exhumation of various military artifacts, and also crucially at least 2 sets of human remains, and then a teaser video for the series, which in the course of a couple of minutes of video appeared to show the worst possible practice in the exhumation of a human burial. And it was that in particular, I think, which has fired up the archaeological world to say, look, this is not acceptable as a television programme for public broadcast.
Right, yeah. Well, absolutely. And I suppose that this is a good point to touch on the difference, I suppose, between conflict archaeology and their stated goals and a couple of other things. I mean, for example, first of all, the recovery of these remains don't actually appear to have gone along the lines of any identifiable methodology. Even if your goal, I suppose, is human rights, restoring the honour to the dead, you want to be sure that you're recovering intact bodies, and I think what we saw was more akin to truffle hunting, spotting a bone and pulling it out of the ground without actually uncovering the whole context. I mean, can you just explain for those who may not be aware, what is the problem with that?
Okay, I think first of all what we have to say is National Geographic have made a statement which says that everything that's shown on the series was done with the appropriate legal permissions and in whatever jurisdiction they were working, with the landowner's permission, and under the auspices of two groups, Legenda in Latvia and Pomost in Poland. Both of these are community-based groups who set out to recover, repatriate and rebury missing service people of World War II. And those are perfectly laudable aims. What they're not, though, is forensic battlefield archaeology. That's not what they do. They find the remains of people and excavate them to the best of their abilities and hand them over to the appropriate war graves authorities. What we saw in the video, and what was the real concern, I think, in the video, was that we didn't see that work being done by Latvians or Poles, and there's a legitimate documentary to be made about that. What we saw instead was an American dealer in Nazi militaria digging out the skeletal remains of a German or Russian soldier under the apparent direction of somebody who lists their activities in their Twitter feed as blogger, writer, musician, treasure hunter, and now TV presenter. You had what was clearly, there was no attempt to define the limit of the excavation of where this person's remains might be lying. They were excavating the bones piecemeal. You have Mr. Gottlieb in the trench tugging at a human femur, which they mistake for a humerus for a start.
Which is not humorous.
Not humorous at all.
Not funny at all.
But mistaking, a substantial long leg bone for a human arm bone on camera, and then pulling the thing out and appearing to break it in the process.
Yeah.
And in the same trench, we see what is apparently a human skull with what could well be a fresh break around the top of the skull. Now, we all know that in excavations, you come across human remains when you're not expecting them, and sometimes they get damaged, and that's okay. We accept that as a fact of life. But once we identify there are human remains present, we proceed analytically, forensically, carefully, and with appropriate tools, and not with amateur excavators who've clearly never done it before, don't know the basics of human anatomy, and are using, a 6-inch plasterer's trowel.
And that's the thing. Yes, it appeared that they were using building and gardening equipment to dig. And also, for those, I suppose, who don't know, I mean, one of the reasons why we're concerned about the state of these human remains is that on the photo, for example, that shows, I think it's the same skull in two different photos, where actually on the cranium you've got what looks like a very fresh break, and we know this because the line around the break is nice and pale. It's not been exposed to soil in the ground over time, and therefore it's still got the innate colour that you have when you crack it open. And as you say, this does happen on archaeological excavations. It's not impossible. It happens all the time, but. As you say, as soon as it happens, the responsibility should, one would hope, be to then go, oh, okay, we've found a skull, dear, we've broke it, but let's define this burial now. Let's try and find the rest of what's going on here. And in this instance, that doesn't seem to have happened. It is plucking at what can be seen, rather crudely. I mean, is there anything else you want to add to that in terms of methodology?
Yeah, I think, from the format of the series, it's very clear they're adopting an American television format that's been used before in series called Diggers, whereby you take some metal detectorists out into the field with a antiquities dealer, and they find stuff and it gets valued, and in the American version sometimes it gets sold. Now, Nat Geo, we must make clear, Nat Geo have said that in this series no material was trafficked or sold. However, in terms of the methodology of using metal detectors on 20th century battlefield sites, on a 20th century battlefield site, if you use a metal detector, shock horror, you get lots of metal.
Well, yes.
Exactly. Yeah, there's lots of metal flying around, and actually they are of very limited. Metal detectors are of very limited value in battlefield archaeology. What is of value is landscape study, where you look for trench lines and positions, and then excavating carefully to help you understand the battlefield and how the landscape was used by the individual soldiers and how they existed within that landscape. You don't do that by walking across that landscape, responding to bleeps in the ground, and then digging random holes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so obviously one of the main reasons why this gained so many people's attention was the video, and that video has been now pulled from the website. I think on Friday it was pulled from the website, along with some of the images which they were publicly using. Well, all the images which they were publicly using to promote the series. Do you think this amounts to effectively an admission of at best a lack of best practice from National Geographic, and I suppose also, I mean, tagged onto that is the question of whether or not in the future, actually, shock horror, they should possibly consider hiring archaeologists for this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think we need to separate what National Geographic as a large, a significant part of a major corporation. They're part of the Fox network. And I think we have to look at it in terms of the way they will be seeing it and the way they clearly launched the programme. They're seeing this as a PR problem. They have launched the programme using probably a standard format that they may well have used in the States before, and they thought that they get a lot of traction with the programme and generate audiences by putting out this kind of material. I think the fact that they have sacked the video, the images, and pretty much all of the written content of the website and replaced it with a touchy-feely responsible website that talks about legal permissions and doing reporting. They even give the Portable Antiquities Scheme a name check, which is great. But why wasn't it there to begin with? So I think this is a PR problem, and I think they're hoping that having made these cosmetic changes to the website, the problem's going to go away and that people like you and me will stop talking about it.
But as we both know, archaeology is not a repeatable experiment. The dig has been done. They can't redo it, and I suppose without an incredibly substantial re-edit or a repointing of the agenda of the series, surely this can't go ahead with any moral mandate.
I don't think it ever had a moral mandate in the way that it's been, certainly in the way it was presented to the world initially, and on the basis of that video and the people that were involved in doing it, who, while they may be absolutely blameless in their own right and have done nothing legally wrong, there are major problems in terms of the way the whole program was set up and what they were asked to do and required to do by the in the course of the programs. I think what happens now, even if there is even if the rest of the program, the rest of the content of that series is brilliant and laudable and moving and whatever, just that one sequence, if that appears, there is still going to be a major row about it. And I think we can take this opportunity maybe to take a positive from this and say to National Geographic Channel and to Clear Story Productions, who've made this, meet with members of the archaeological community who are recognised conflict and battlefield archaeologists, preview the series with them, and take their advice on how you can re-edit it and rework it to turn it into the kind of programme it should have been and the way it was presented to begin with, rather than what it appears to have turned into now, which is basically an exercise in metal detecting for sexy military stuff with added bodies.
Well, yes, absolutely, yeah, and I suppose that's the point, isn't it? It's the crude and crass nature of the programme that we've seen so far. I suppose also it's worthwhile pointing out as well to them, but also actually to anyone who doesn't know, who's watching this, that there is a big difference between digging up a grave and digging and finding human remains on a battlefield. You know, there have been criticism levelled at archaeologists that well, no one should be digging up war graves. But in this instance, we're not talking about excavating a war grave. It looks like these remains were probably either best a field burial, or because of their disarticulated nature, more likely someone buried in the blowback from an explosion, something like that. And I suppose that adds to the technical complexity of the recovery, and therefore again is an argument for having a good archaeologist on site. But also as well, this can be dramatic. It can be good television. It just has to be done well and done right. There is something innately dramatic about that event, but having some guy who doesn't know the difference between a shoulder and a hip yank at the remains, it takes it to a level which simply isn't acceptable.
I think you're absolutely right to make that distinction and to pull out those examples. I mean, I can give you an example of two very specific examples of where this has been done for media and dealt with in the media appropriately. The first is the excavations by the Plug Street project and No Man's Land that were depicted in the series Finding the Fallen, where you have properly qualified archaeologists and forensic archaeologists and so on finding remains in the course of battlefield studies on the Western Front in France and Belgium, and then following through the whole forensic and historical research that you're able to do when you recover a battlefield casualty like that forensically, and you can tie the personal the personal items to that specific set of remains, and ultimately in the best cases trace somebody's family. Recently, there was the case of Private Alan Mather of the Australian Imperial Force, who was killed in action in 1917, was buried on the battlefield at Messines. He was found again accidentally. He was a battlefield burial. He wasn't expected. He turned up in the course of the excavation. They immediately stopped. They excavated him forensically with the full permissions of the Australian and Belgian governments, and ultimately, the Australian government took his case through to DNA testing and isotope testing in Australia, and they traced his family, and I gave them 100% positive identification, and he's buried under a named headstone now in a military cemetery in Belgium. So that's how it can and should be done.
Yeah, and that is actually restoring honour to the burial, to the dead. If that is the goal, and one of the stated goals of this sort of TV series, good archaeological practice will help you do that. Simply recovering the remains and flying them back to a country that you think they might be from just isn't good enough. So in summary then, you hope to see some sort of dialogue between these producers, National Geographic and archaeologists, on how to do it better in the future. I mean, would you be happy for them to, for example, get in touch with you, or even people like Tony Pollard, this kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we should do is, as a sector, hold out a hand to the broadcasters, to National Geographic Channel, to Clear Story, and others maybe, and say, look, but in this particular instance, meet with us, discuss with us how you can make this kind of programming. We want to see this kind of programming made. We just want to see it made responsibly. And I think there's a lesson here for the broadcasters, that they can't commission this kind of stuff in future without this kind of row ensuing. Therefore, all of us need to work together to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the way to do that is to meet and discuss, and perhaps, starting with this series, bring a working group together to preview the series with Clear Story and Nat Geo, and make positive suggestions about how it can be re-edited and re-nuanced to bring out the issues that we've discussed this morning and that our colleagues have discussed online in the response to the initial video. Turn it into a positive that works for everybody, the broadcasters, the archaeologists, and ultimately actually for the audiences who watch this stuff at home.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Grand. Well, thank you again for your time this morning, Andy, and we can only hope that this continuing discussion will lead to a substantial change in the attitudes of entertainment producers, essentially, but also as well in the attitudes, I guess, of the public towards what archaeologists do and how that interacts with, frankly, very recent and very emotive history.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again, and well, until next time, bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.